Welcome to Soft Meridians, a magical journey of healing and compassion. If you're seeking the actual story, you can find chapter timestamps in the video description. This audiobook invites you into the gentle world of Aria Moonstone, a young healer learning to trace the invisible threads of emotional energy in the luminous realm of Étheria. Before we begin, take a moment to settle into a comfortable position. Let your body sink into your resting place, feeling fully supported and at ease. Adjust your blankets or pillow, creating a soft sanctuary just for you. This is your time to release the day and invite tranquility into your evening. Let's take a soothing breath together. Slowly inhale through your nose, allowing the air to flow like gossamer threads of magical energy. Then exhale gently through your mouth, imagining you're releasing any tension into the soft crystal chambers of the luminous sanctuary. With each breath, feel your body softening, your consciousness expanding like the delicate meridians Aria learns to trace. If your mind wanders, simply let thoughts drift like gentle wind chimes and return to the rhythms of your breath. Chapter 1. The Whispers of Unseen Threads. The first light of dawn crept softly through the crystal windows of the luminous sanctuary, painting Aria Moonstone's bedroom in delicate shades of lavender and pale gold. Her room breathed with a gentle magic. Translucent wind chimes crafted from moonglass trembled almost imperceptibly, their crystalline whispers creating a melody that seemed to trace invisible lines across the space. Aria's eyes fluttered open, her consciousness emerging from a dream landscape as delicate as spun silk. She had been dreaming of energy, not the sharp, angular currents that most healers perceived, but something softer, more fluid. In her dream, emotional pathways had appeared like gossamer threads, luminous and breathing with an almost sentient quality. "Another dream," she murmured to herself, her voice as soft as the morning light. Her fingers traced idle patterns on her bedspread, a deep indigo fabric woven with threads that seemed to shimmer and shift with her touch. Each movement felt like a conversation, not with words, but with something more profound, more elemental. Eldon Starweaver's voice drifted up from the lower levels of the sanctuary, a gentle rhythm that seemed to harmonize with the morning's quiet magic. "Aria," he called, his tone more an invitation than a summons. "Your morning meditation awaits." She moved with a grace that belied her 17 years, her movements deliberate and fluid. The wooden floor beneath her feet seemed to welcome each step, a living surface that breathed and responded to her presence. Her nightgown, crafted from layers of ethereal silk, moved around her like a gentle cloud. In the meditation chamber, sunlight filtered through panels of living crystal, creating patterns that danced and transformed with each subtle shift of light. Eldon sat cross-legged on a cushion woven from moonflower fibers, his silver-streaked hair catching the morning's first rays. "You're experiencing something unique," he said, not turning to look at her. It wasn't a question, but an observation that hung in the air like a delicate spell. "Your sensitivity is not a weakness, but a profound gift." Aria settled beside him, her breath falling into a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the sanctuary's quiet heartbeat. The air around them felt alive, not with tension, but with a vibrant, gentle consciousness. "The Meridians speak differently to you," Eldon continued, his voice a low, soothing instrument. "Where others see lines, you perceive rivers. Where others feel energy, you understand its song." A subtle warmth began to bloom in the center of Aria's chest. Not the burning of ambition or the heat of effort, but a soft, expanding awareness. Her fingers, resting lightly on her knees, began to trace almost imperceptible patterns in the air. And then, for just a moment, she saw them. The energy lines connecting everything, not as harsh, rigid structures, but as breathings, as living conversations between all things. Luminous threads of lavender and gold, pulsing with a compassion so deep it felt like a lullaby. "Breathe," Eldon whispered. "Just breathe." And so she did, allowing the sanctuary's magic to cradle her, to whisper its ancient, gentle secrets. Chapter 2. The Harmonizing Touch. The afternoon light transformed the luminous sanctuary into a cathedral of soft magic, crystal chambers, breathing with an ethereal luminescence that seemed to pulse with its own delicate consciousness. Shadows danced like whispered memories along translucent walls, creating a landscape where reality and wonder intertwined with breathless intimacy. Aria stood beside Eldon, her posture both tentative and profound, a young healer on the precipice of understanding a magic far more intricate than any spell could capture. Before them lay Rowan, a traveling musician whose spirit seemed as fragmented as a melody interrupted mid-phrase. His hands, once instruments of pure creation, now trembling with an unspoken narrative of loss. Lyra Silvermist moved with a grace that suggested she was more attuned to the sanctuary's subtle rhythms than to the physical world. Her fingers traced idle patterns near the wind chimes, each movement creating soft, almost imperceptible sounds that seemed to communicate in a language beyond human comprehension. "Healing," Eldon murmured, his voice a landscape of wisdom, "is not about conquering pain, but about creating a space where transformation can breathe." His words hung in the air like gossamer threads, delicate yet impossibly strong. Aria closed her eyes, her consciousness expanding beyond the physical realm. The meridians, those luminous pathways of emotional energy, began to reveal themselves. They were not mere lines of force, but living narratives, emotional rivers carrying the most intimate stories of beings. Her first touch against Rowan's wrist was barely a whisper, less a physical contact and more a conversation between two souls. The energy around them shifted with a subtlety that defied explanation. Lavender gold pathways of magical intention pulsed with a compassion so profound it felt like a half-remembered lullaby, like the first breath after a long silence. Rowan's response was not dramatic. A single tear traced a path down his cheek, not of pain, but of recognition, of being seen in a way that transcended physical perception. "What do you feel?" Lyra asked, her voice harmonizing with the sanctuary's ambient magic. "It's like..." Rowan's voice caught, searching for language to describe the ineffable, "like remembering how to breathe when you didn't realize you'd forgotten." Eldon watched Aria with a gaze that carried generations of healing wisdom. Where another mentor might have offered explicit instruction, he simply observed, trusting in the delicate intelligence of her emerging gifts, believing that true magic reveals itself through patience and profound listening. The afternoon light continued its slow, meditative dance. Wind chimes sang their perpetual gentle song, each note a testament to the sanctuary's living magic. And in this moment, healing happened, not with thunderous declarations or explosive revelations, but with the most profound of quiet revolutions. A restoration so subtle, it felt almost like remembering a song you'd never realized you knew. Aria opened her eyes, and for the first time she understood. The Meridians were not just channels of energy, they were stories, breathing, living, waiting to be heard, and she was learning their language. Chapter 3. Echoes of Unspoken Melodies. The sanctuary's evening light spilled like liquid amber through the crystal chambers, transforming the healing spaces into a realm where magic breathed with a consciousness more delicate than whispered secrets. Aria stood at the threshold of a profound discovery, her awareness expanding like ripples across an infinite, luminous pond. A group of travelers had arrived as the day's final light began to dissolve, weary wanderers carrying emotional landscapes more complex than any geographical map. Their energies moved around them like wounded birds, fragmented and searching, each carrying stories that hummed just beneath the surface of perception. Lyra moved among them, her presence a subtle harmonizing force. Where others might see strangers, she perceived intricate emotional tapestries, threads of pain, resilience, hope interweaving in patterns too delicate to be captured by mere observation. Not all wounds are visible, Eldon had taught Aria, his voice a meditation unto itself. Some injuries live in the spaces between breaths, in the quiet moments where memory and intention dance. The first traveler, a woman whose name emerged as Seraphina, carried a wound so profound it seemed to bend the very light around her. Her hands, once instruments of creation, now moved with a hesitancy that spoke of profound loss. A musician like Rowan before her, but with a story etched in deeper shadows. Aria approached not with the confidence of a healer, but with the tender curiosity of someone learning a language both ancient and impossibly new. Her fingers traced patterns in the air, not touching but listening. The Meridians responded like living threads, pulsing with a compassion that defied rational understanding. Sometimes, Lyra whispered to Seraphina, her voice a gentle invitation, healing begins with being truly seen. The sanctuary itself seemed to breathe, crystal walls shimmering with an internal light that shifted between lavender and gold, creating an atmosphere where magic and emotion became indistinguishable. Wind chimes suspended near the windows sang their perpetual delicate song, a melody that seemed to translate the unspoken languages of pain and transformation. Seraphina's energy was a complex symphony, fragments of lost music, interrupted dreams, moments of profound beauty, crushed beneath unexpected sorrows. And Aria, standing at the precipice of her emerging gift, began to understand that healing was not about fixing, but about creating space, about listening. Her first touch was barely a whisper against Seraphina's wrist, But in that moment, something extraordinary unfolded, not with dramatic revelation, but with the subtlety of a memory returning, soft as first light. Tears traced silent paths down Seraphina's cheeks, not of pain, but of recognition, of being understood in a language that transcended words. "It feels," Seraphina murmured, her voice catching like a half-remembered melody, like remembering a song I never knew I'd forgotten. Eldon watched from a respectful distance, his gaze carrying generations of healing wisdom. Where another mentor might have offered explicit instruction, he simply observed, trusting in the delicate intelligence of Aria's emerging gifts. The evening light continued its slow, meditative dance. Outside, the whispering peaks breathed their eternal, silent song. And in this moment, healing happened, not with thunderous declarations, but with the most profound of quiet revolutions. A restoration so subtle, it felt almost like remembering. Aria opened her eyes, and for the first time, she truly understood. The Meridians were not just channels of energy, they were stories, breathing, living, waiting to be heard, and she was learning their most sacred language. Chapter 4. The Empathic Threshold. The luminous sanctuary breathed with a quiet anticipation, its crystal walls shimmering like memory caught in liquid light. Aria stood at the threshold of something profound, a healing challenge that would test the delicate boundaries of her emerging abilities. Before her sat Marcus, a traveler whose emotional landscape seemed carved from shadows and unspoken pain. His energy moved like wounded starlight, fragmented and trembling, carrying a burden so deep it seemed to bend the very fabric of the sanctuary's gentle magic. Eldon watched from the periphery, his presence a silent anchor. Where another mentor might have offered explicit guidance, he understood that Aria's gift required something more nuanced, a listening beyond words, a healing beyond touch. "Some wounds," Lyra had whispered earlier, her voice a soft melody that drifted through the sanctuary's crystal chambers, "are not meant to be conquered, they are meant to be understood." Aria's awareness expanded, her consciousness tracing the most delicate of emotional meridians. They were not harsh lines of energy, but living narratives, breathing, pulsing pathways that carried the most intimate stories of human experience. Her first approach was not physical, but intentional, a compassionate resonance that moved beyond the limitations of touch, creating a space of profound witnessing. Marcus's energy shifted, not dramatically, but with the subtlety of a memory returning, soft as first light. "I lost everything," Marcus murmured, his voice a landscape of unspoken grief. "Not just people, but the music of my own becoming." Aria understood in that moment that healing was never about fixing. It was about creating space, about listening with something deeper than ears, seeing with something more profound than eyes. The sanctuary's wind chimes sang their perpetual gentle song, a melody that seemed to translate the unspoken languages of transformation. Lavender and gold light danced along the walls, creating an atmosphere where magic and emotion became indistinguishable. Her touch, when it finally came, was barely a whisper, a connection so delicate it might have been mistaken for breath, for thought, for the most intimate of conversations. Tears traced silent paths down Marcus's cheeks, not of pain, but of recognition, of being truly seen in a way that transcended physical perception. "It feels," he whispered, "like remembering how to breathe when you didn't realize you'd forgotten." Eldon's gaze carried generations of healing wisdom. He saw not just the moment, but the profound journey unfolding. A young healer learning that true magic resides in compassion, in the ability to hold space for another's transformation. Outside, the whispering peaks breathed their eternal silent song. The evening light continued its slow, meditative dance, and in this moment, healing happened, not with thunderous declarations, but with the most profound of quiet revolutions. A restoration so subtle, it felt almost like remembering a melody you'd never realized you knew. Aria opened her eyes, and the meridians around her pulsed with a newfound understanding. They were not just channels of energy, they were stories, breathing, living, waiting to be heard, and she was learning their most sacred language. Chapter 5: The Resonant Gathering. The autumn equinox transformed the luminous sanctuary into a living kaleidoscope of magical energy, where crystal chambers breathed with an almost sentient luminescence. Soft light fractured and danced along translucent walls, creating a realm where the boundaries between magic, emotion, and physical space dissolved into something utterly extraordinary. Travelers from every corner of Étheria gathered, each a walking constellation of unspoken stories, their emotional landscapes shimmering like living manuscripts waiting to be read. They came with histories etched into their skin, carried in the trembling of their hands, whispered through the subtle languages of breath and memory. Aria stood at the sanctuary's heart, her awareness expanding like ripples across an infinite, luminous pond. Where once she might have felt overwhelmed, now she perceived the gathering as a complex symphony, each individual a unique instrument, their emotional currents weaving an intricate musical narrative that transcended individual experience. Eldon moved through the gathering like a silver thread, his presence both anchoring and transformative. His silver-streaked hair caught the light in ways that suggested he was only partially of this physical realm, a guardian of mysteries, a translator of the unspoken. "Observe," he murmured to Aria, his voice a meditation unto itself. "How healing moves not through individual action, but through collective resonance." Lyra's silver mist stood near the sanctuary's central crystal fountain, her fingers tracing patterns in the air that seemed to translate emotional languages too delicate for words. The wind chimes surrounding her sang a melody so subtle it felt more like a collective breath, a whispered conversation between magic and consciousness. The travelers began sharing their stories. But this was no ordinary storytelling. Each narrative emerged not just through words, but through the complex energetic signatures that surrounded them. A baker from the northern valleys spoke of resilience. Her meridians pulsed with warm amber tones, telling a story of survival that stretched beyond her physical form. Generations of endurance woven into her very being. Her hands, weathered and strong, moved with a grace that suggested she could knead hope as easily as she could knead bread. A wandering musician revealed layers of unresolved grief. His energy moved like wounded starlight, fragmented yet beautiful. A melody interrupted, waiting for someone to hear its complete song. When he spoke, it was as if each word carried the weight of unsung compositions, of music lost and remembered. An elderly herbalist from the misty mountain regions shared tales of botanical magic so ancient it predated spoken language. Her meridians flickered with emerald and silver, suggesting a connection to the earth that ran deeper than physical roots. A living bridge between human consciousness and the profound intelligence of growing things. Aria listened, not just with her ears, but with an emerging understanding that transcended physical perception. She saw the meridians connecting these individuals, gossamer threads of luminous energy that pulsed and breathed, creating a tapestry more intricate than any individual thread could comprehend. "We are never truly separate," Eldon whispered, his hand briefly touching Aria's shoulder. A transmission of wisdom more profound than language, a moment of connection that spoke volumes in absolute silence. As twilight descended, the gathering reached a moment of collective transformation. The sanctuary's crystal walls shimmered with an internal light that danced between lavender and gold, creating an atmosphere where magic and emotion became indistinguishable. Aria understood then that her gift was never about fixing. It was about creating space, about listening, about witnessing the extraordinary magic that happens when souls truly see one another. The wind chimes sang their perpetual delicate song. The crystal walls breathed, and magic, pure, compassionate, luminous, filled every silent space, turning the gathering into a living, breathing spell of collective healing. Chapter 6. Harmonization. The final light of the autumn equinox transformed the luminous sanctuary into a living tapestry of magical resonance. Aria stood at the center of a moment that felt both infinite and ephemeral. A convergence of healing energies that would reshape not just individual lives, but the very fabric of magical understanding. Eldon watched from the sanctuary's crystalline periphery, his presence a silent testament to generations of healing wisdom. Where other mentors might have spoken, he understood that true magic resided in witnessing, in creating space for transformation to unfold with its own profound intelligence. The community of healers, travelers, and wounded souls began to pulse with a collective energy that transcended individual pain. Meridians, those gossamer threads of emotional magic, began to intertwine, creating a living network of healing that moved beyond physical touch, beyond words, into something purely transformative. Aria's consciousness expanded, no longer confined to her individual perception. She became a conduit, a bridge between individual suffering and collective healing. Her awareness traced the most delicate emotional pathways, understanding now that true magic was never about fixing, but about creating space for profound reconnection. "We are never truly separate," she whispered, the words emerging not from her mouth, but from some deeper, more luminous place of understanding. The sanctuary's crystal walls breathed with an internal light that danced between lavender and gold, soft as memory, profound as unspoken revelation. Wind chimes suspended near windows sang a melody so subtle it felt more like a collective breath, the sound of healing itself. Lyra moved beside her, their energies harmonizing like two notes in a complex, beautiful chord. Where once Aria had felt overwhelmed by her sensitivity, now she recognized it as her greatest strength, a gift that allowed her to perceive the most delicate threads of human experience. Each traveler who had passed through the sanctuary over these weeks became a living testament to transformation. Marcus, whose deep grief had once seemed immovable. Seraphina, whose lost music had found its way back through gentle understanding. Rowan, whose hands had remembered how to create. The healing was never about erasing pain, Aria now understood. It was about creating a landscape where pain could be witnessed, honored, and ultimately transformed. As twilight descended, something extraordinary happened. The Meridians, those invisible lines of emotional energy, began to synchronize, not through force, but through the most delicate of invitations, a collective breath, a shared moment of profound understanding. Eldon's eyes met Aria's, a transmission of wisdom that required no words. She had become not just a healer, but a translator of the most sacred of languages, the language of compassionate connection. The sanctuary itself seemed to exhale, crystal walls shimmering with an internal light that suggested magic was never something done to someone, but something shared, something breathed together. Outside, the whispering peaks stood as silent witnesses. The wind carried the softest of melodies, a song of healing, of hope, of the extraordinary magic that happens when souls are truly seen. And Aria understood, with a clarity that brought tears to her eyes, that this was her path, not to fix, not to heal, but to create space, to listen, to witness the most profound transformation of all, the return of souls to their own inherent, luminous wholeness. Magic, she realized, was never about power. It was about compassion. It was about connection. It was about love.